So I've been part of this international nonviolent communication practice group. And there was this one particular session when this black woman who has been predominantly quiet in all the sessions chose to speak. And she began by saying that as a woman of color, she experiences this overwhelming anxiety when she has to voice her opinions in groups. She was still in the midst of a sentence when this another brown man interrupted her and expressed feeling angry at her. He went on to say that he thought all of this discussion around race was absolute nonsense, and he said that this upcoming diversity, equity and inclusion trend was just all about people who wanted to use the race card and the gender card to avoid looking at themselves. And he continued to throw his opinions. At one point, the facilitator interrupted him and moved towards him with a lot of empathy and curiosity. And their exploration went on for almost 35 minutes. And the brown man was eventually able to acknowledge that he doesn't want to look at race simply because he has a lot of wounding around being an Indian man in a white world. And each time he had to accept that he was brown, he had to accept that he was lesser than others. It was fascinating for me that while there was this amazing exploration that happened with this particular man, nobody in the group, including the facilitator, asked that woman as to what was she feeling. So I remember by this time, I was beginning to feel some rage in me because I had recognized that there were now only 10 minutes remaining and we probably won't have any time to process what this woman was feeling. So I raised my voice and I said that I'm feeling very angry by what I'm noticing. And I told the facilitator that it's just fascinating for me that she chose to prioritize the man's anger, who has been any which ways very vocal in all the groups. And this woman who had spoken probably for the first time in the group, somehow her feelings didn't seem to matter. The facilitator took my feedback and she offered her empathy back to me, saying that she was seeing how my need for fairness was not met. And however, in that whole process, the remaining 10 minutes were also gone. And the black woman was still not being addressed. She was still not being spoken to. So when we ended the session, I remember still looking at that woman and feeling this excessive unease in my chest. So I decided to reach out to her immediately after the session. And I checked on how she was feeling. And she just said that she was okay. So I turned back and said that I was quite amazed at what I perceived as stillness in her. And while I was not directly involved in the whole conversation, I was feeling so much anger. And then she turned back and said something to me that just created such deep sadness in me. She looked at me and said, Anisha, do I have a choice? Stillness is a survival mechanism. There is this, any which way is this judgment about black women being hysterical, black women being aggressive. And I don't want to be played to that stereotype. And I know that if I will be still, I won't be attacked any further. So I could accept the truth of her lived experience, and at the same time, I had this multiple flashes going through my mind where I remembered situations when I have been the facilitator in my own groups, and I have witnessed some of the male participants getting really angry and the women having to be quiet and, soothe them and take care of them. I was also reminded of this situations in my own family where the men of the house had to be soothed before any conversation could ever happen, or even office meetings where the male boss would end up, throwing these tantrums and everybody else had to kind of just be frozen in their own pants. And as I saw that, I saw myself again feeling very upset because I recognized that I am part of the problem. because I have done something similar many a times. I have witnessed something similar multiple times, and I have never raised my volume. I've never spoken about this very openly. And it's that moment that I felt like this decisiveness in me that not anymore. I'm not going to continue let this happen anymore. And I thought to myself that how do I become more and more aware of these processes? And I had some questions popping in my mind, and I'd really like to share it with you. Who am I paying attention to when I'm part of groups? Is anybody getting ignored? When I'm witnessing conflicts, do I tend to focus on the louder voices? Does anybody's voice get silenced here? Whose needs and whose feelings are getting priority? And at what cost? Who am I expecting to do the emotional labor in situations of conflict? Who do I tend to empathize first with? When I'm witnessing a conflict, who do I choose to first listen to? And as I'm sharing these questions, I'm wondering, friends, do these questions resonate with you? Have you found yourself in similar situations where some voices have been domineering, either because they're men, either because they are from the higher socioeconomic status, either because they're white, either because they're cisgendered, either because they are heterosexual? I'd invite you all to join me in bringing about this change and enhancing our sensitivity to where are we perpetuating the cycles of oppression.